Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of this podcast and Thrive Meetings and Events. And on this show, I talk to experts in all facets of food and beverage, from chefs to eaters to banquet captains and food and beverage directors and everyone, farmers and everyone in between. I am live from IMEX today, and it has been a whirlwind show already, just 2 days, one day on the show floor so far, and one day full of education. But with me today are two gentlemen that I just adore. So I have Mark Cooper, CEO of IACC, and Sean Anderson, who actually is with Vice President of
Sodexo Live.
Sodexo Live.
Sodexo Live,
Sodexo
that's right.
Live. But you are the Board President of IACC.
That's correct.
Okay.
Global President.
So welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, Tracy. And you are also adorable as well in our eyes.
Great to see you. Live and in person.
Yes.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah,
Yes.
our first time together for the three of us
Yes.
in such a very long time.
Yeah, because you were here earlier in the year, but you were in Dallas and we were in Wilmington. Or no, you were in Chicago or
I
Dallas?
was in Dallas.
Dallas.
Absolutely. That's my first live US event since
Woohoo.
January 2020.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was great to be back, but even better this week.
Yes.
So many of our friends.
Is it worth a quick side story to tell you about Mark's travel here?
Sure.
Because I think he deserves truly some sort of statue or medal being built out front. And I'll say it because Mark never will.
Okay.
But here's a day in the life of Mark Cooper in order to get to IMEX and spend time with us.
Uh-huh.
It starts in right outside London. It starts
Right.
on a train. Take the train into the city, hop on a plane, take the plane to Toronto, where you can circle and wait and land and sit in the gate long enough for the American borders to open so that the guy from Britain can get to Toronto and sit and parked for a quick night's 5 hours plus 3 hours on the tarmac,
Yeah.
circling before they said, okay, open the gates. And then the plane crosses the border and here he shows up, maybe 2 hours, I'm gonna say, before our actual first live session that we taught on Monday. So I don't know what the award is for that. But
I'd have jumped through more hoops just to be here.
Okay, so
but
literally-
they were
that's
a few.
amazing, Mark.
Were you on the tarmac literally until the border, because the border wasn't opened yet?
No, I was actually in immigration, and not because I was a red flag to anybody, but just because overwhelmingly there seemed to be myself and 50,000 other Canadians that wanted to get on that first flight first flights out of Toronto on Monday morning. But
Gotcha.
Great fanfare. But we're here, we're live, and we're back into live events.
We are back into live events. Yesterday I was talking to Dale, and there's almost 11,000 people here.
That's fantastic.
It is.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Okay, so all three of us spoke on Monday for Smart Monday here at IMEX, which is sponsored by MPI. But so I was 10 o'clock in the morning and talking about food trends, eating at a meeting, and you had a session in the afternoon, which I don't remember what the exact title was.
We were reimagining conference breaks
Okay.
and lunches as it relates to small business meetings. And in answer to your first question, IACC, what's it about? It's
Yes.
really easy. It's a collection of about 400 small to mid-sized conference training and meeting venues that really do specialize in business events. And that's our wheelhouse. So we were talking about that as it relates to the journey in the last year for those that didn't close and carried out important events and training that were needed to keep economies going. But also, more importantly, Sean and I had to get our crystal ball out and think about how that's going to evolve from the today and our operating environments to longer term trends, or what it could translate into if we're really lucky.
Well, and going back to the meeting that we did, that you and I were in Wilmington and you were in Dallas, and they're like, okay, yeah, everybody's going to come with their own QR code for their diet. And I'm like, you're going to ruin the events industry with that. But, that's it probably is going to happen in 15 years, you know?
It's funny when we did that exercise, Mark, that Tracy's referencing, where we were talking about take a look 5-10 years down the road. What do you? That was one of the outcomes was people will show up with their own personal, with weigh in from their doctor and their own personal preferences.
We just know. We would just know, and we plug that in. That's right. We're going to have so many magical effects. It relates to everything else: choice, variety, availability, speed of service, reduction in waste. Artificial intelligence will have a bigger role to play. But yes, it's interesting how that can look. If you're looking a long time into the future, it can be quite scary in terms of what it looks like, and then the reality of it's something very different but achieves the same goal.
Yeah. Well, and I actually heard a guy in Raleigh-Durham area talking about it in an event right after that, a couple months after. He actually has a company that's doing that, designing that based on people's individual personal needs from food. And I'm like, I was on Zoom and they weren't taking questions from the Zoom audience. So I'm like, I can't ask you, but I got to find them. So what from your session the other day, let's just jump back to your studies, because you actually released 2 studies, during IACC on breaks and lunch. So can you tell the audience a little bit about what those said? And that's coming from the planner's perspective or the venue perspective?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to start? How about we start? Because that part of that was in our session on Monday. It was the part when we talked about case studies.
Okay.
Right. So one of the great examples that we had in there, and this particular was from the venue side. Okay. It was a great innovation, but like anything else, right? It was this creative idea to try to solve for the very specific situation that you're in, but it turns out to have great results, and it's got legs, and it's got opportunities to use in the future. So this particular idea was Chef Jakob Buss at Bouteho, right, in Denmark.
Okay.
And so he was one of the venues, as Mark mentioned, where they were still able, everybody knows kind of the progression from COVID, right? We start with just shut everything down, and then to where we are today. But in between that, there were some openings and closings, and you could do small to mid-sized meetings depending where you were in the world. And so at their venue, they wanted to make sure they were at the ready to do these small to mid-sized meetings all the way throughout. And so we had this ingenious idea. It started with some small miniature ovens that they had used in the past. And they would put these out for site tours, and they would, not so coincidentally, put some fresh baked chocolate chip cookies maybe in those as somebody's going on the site tour. Not that is, I'm sure
influential at all.
Yeah, no, not influential, right? And so that was the genesis of this. Now you have to, when you think of these ovens, so they're a little bit larger than those small toaster. They're commercial sized ovens, but still that was their initial purpose. So his first idea was, what if we spread these out across the building into a couple of different areas and use them that same way with these particular, but the idea is to draw people apart. Right.
Oh.
So that it would separate and, it would lighten up the footfall and the congestion of traffic. Because you remember, as we were learning through COVID, that was an important element, right? It wasn't a foodborne illness, it was a people behavior challenge, and you had to try to keep people apart. And so that evolved into these unbelievably beautiful. So then he starts with that and then moves them into the meeting rooms themselves, and has created, out of repurposed equipment all over the building, these absolutely gorgeous built-in. I mean, you would think they're part of the furniture. They are beautiful, built-in in-room breaks. So This is next generation stuff. This is not roll a cart in, and not at all. It looks absolutely like you're having a meeting in the most comfortable family room you've ever been in.
Wow.
And it's got some embedded industrial equipment that's framed out very nicely. And so they're able to actually move a group in there for the entire day. The food is delicious, it's creative, and they can accommodate a group that doesn't need to leave there for lunch, doesn't need to leave for breaks. They're beautiful, delicious, and the only time people would leave the meeting room, right, is maybe for a restroom break or to get a breath of fresh air outside. Otherwise, they'd be inside.
Wow.
And it was such a huge success now that I don't know they'll ever be able to undo that. I mean, that's a fantastic experience. Again, born kind of out of necessity, but you apply some ingenuity and you get this great solution. The meeting room is in, right? They've got a handful of these and they're in unbelievable demand.
Wow. What's important as well in terms of the differentiation of what Sean's just described there, we're not talking about in-room catering like you get in a convention centre, where they set it up, it's there, drapes, and it goes again. And normally it's set up and goes again in your meeting, and it's making a heck of a noise and it's disrupting you. No, these are these are permanent installations, but they're made to look and feel more like you're having a meeting in your kitchen.
That's awesome.
Before the pandemic, it was very much about how we become more home-like in terms of our meeting environment. And this really has just accelerated that and made it really okay, as apart from quite nice to have. And it's available more often now in the types of venues like Batahoy and the IACC venues, which only look after business meetings.
Right.
That room does not have to be a wedding room on Saturday after it's been that meeting room on the Friday. So you can make those sort of installations. Also, as well as recycling those ovens, everything else was made from recycled materials. So they kept one eye on the big picture as they're scrambling to be able to deal with the today.
Well, so, I mean, and recycling, I mean, it's not putting that oven in the landfill, because that's where it's going to go,
No,
right?
they find a different purpose for it.
That's awesome.
And that, again, that creativity turns into something that's just even greater than maybe you could have ever expected in the beginning.
Right.
The other consequence as well, if we think about this, Sean talked about pulling people apart, and I saw your face, Tracy, because we're an industry for getting people together, right?
Right.
But actually, there's a subtle difference between that, because getting people together as a group that are going to do things together, make decisions together, solve problems together, that's still critical.
Right.
But this is about different groups and different meetings coming together in common areas. And still today, even with the restrictions lifting off, we haven't got back to the we want to be in a shared environment, so that myself as an attendee of Barclays Bank gets to talk to a different attendee from TD Bank, and this accidental collision turns into something magical. No, we're still wanting to keep within the bubbles of our own groups,
right?
And that self-contained environment does that. Now, as we think about that in the future, one of the questions on the minds of leaders like Sean, who's responsible for multiple conference centres with shared dining rooms that can be very effective, very efficient. People can go in 10 minutes and out the other end, or they can spend an hour for lunches. How are those environments going to adapt, or will they need to adapt in the future if we keep that, that single group sort of mentality?
It's very group preference oriented.
Right.
And as Mark's talking, as we're coming back from COVID, there are groups that say, right, we will not meet under, except under these conditions.
Right.
That's very group specific to the neighboring group that's also meeting in the same venue.
Right.
So the idea to keep them separated so they can each follow their own behavior patterns, but still bring them together.
But make it an upgraded experience.
Right.
This isn't about
amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, we've even seen some examples where you get your own private chef.
Right.
So think of Swiss sort of chalet holiday.
Awesome.
You've got, and your private chef is there looking after your group for the 2 or 3 days you're at that conference centre, and they're doing live cooking, live service. Even your own sort of dining concierge team. So that exclusivity
sounds amazing.
An increased experience. It can be a premium. It can be a product that you sell for the within the meetings and the hospitality industry, because there's a value attached to it.
Yep.
So that's what's exciting.
And just thinking of the angle, with me and making sure that everybody feels included in that food and beverage, with having your own customized culinary team, you're not worried about who's on and who's not showing up in the morning and managing all these other BEOs. Because if you go in the back of the house of any convention center or hotel or large venue, there's 100 BEOs up. And who are they making for? Yeah,
so no
I love
one
that.
person in the old environment is going to know that Tracy is gluten-free.
Right.
But when you've got a personal team that's looking after your meeting and you're one of 20 people and they're looking after you for breakfast, lunch and dinner, they're going to know exactly what Tracy needs.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
It is
So
exciting.
the personalisation leads to an enhanced experience, leads to a higher product offering, and it's got nothing to do with pandemics and
right. Well, and personalization has been coming across for years now, and it's just now going to be a lot more accentuated because of COVID and coming out of that. And this is my own little space. How do I, and because we're here at IMEX and everybody's like, are you a hugger? Or are you, fist pumper or whatever? And how are you doing that? But I think adding that personalization to the meeting and then to the person is just going to enhance it so much.
Right.
And not to bash this big, huge convention center or any of them, but having that intimate space in conference centers makes it a lot easier to do as well.
Agreed.
Okay, you mentioned foodborne illnesses a few more minutes ago.
Okay.
Because you were talking, because COVID is not you don't get COVID. It's not a foodborne illness. Right. But there's a study. I use a lot of information from the International Food Information Council. And so their study from 2021 said that more than 50% are worried about foodborne illness and, coming out of COVID. And I asked in my session yesterday, I asked the 100 people there, I'm like, how many of you have asked about the health inspection scores and their food service practices and their food safety practices before COVID? And one woman raised her hand.
Yeah. Doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me either. And I literally had my boots on. I'm like, and we're going to kick that door down and we're going to ask about food safety. And, we need to. So are the conference centers and Sodexo Live open to answering those questions and addressing those? Because right now, onions are recalled, right?
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely willing to have that dialogue. I think first of all, we think we're pretty good at it.
Right.
And so we also appreciate, quite honestly, we look at that as a point of leverage. And that is if you want to have those intelligent conversations and dig deep into the practices and how we work hard and train every single day to keep people healthy and safe, we invite it, because if that becomes a point of differentiation for you in your decision process, bring it on. What we realize is, and this is we think we're in a good spot, and there are a lot of other operators that are in the same position. But the more conscious the buyer is, the planner is, the attendee is about these, because now they have been. When COVID hit, that came front and center right in your dashboard. It is everybody's worried about safety, security, health. It's doubled down in that focus, and it's been a primary focus in everyone's life for 12, 16, 18 months. It's not going to go away. Right. It's not going to maybe go away ever, but it sure isn't going to go away in the next 2 months. So it elevates that conversation. We're glad. We're glad, because if it gives us a forum to reconfirm for people, we take care of that here. We're safe. We make sure the food is prepared safely. We present it safely. People are trained and people are masked or vaccinated or whatever the requirements are. We'd like to have that conversation.
Because your practices were already there before COVID.
They're good. They're just different. They're just different now, and that's not to minimize the importance of it at all. But we do all right in that arena, so we welcome the conversation.
But Tracy, if we spin that question on its head, I would ask the question of: are our meeting professionals adequately educated to evaluate venues in those sort of ways, or do they take all of the food and beverage for granted, focus on other areas in terms of evaluating a venue for suitability, and then when they don't deliver on the food and beverage, it becomes the biggest disappointment, the biggest, the biggest nuisance, distraction for the attendees, and completely marks down their experience, because bad food and beverage has a propensity to do that. So is it education?
Right.
Because those questions aren't being asked.
Right. Well, and that brings me into a question that I'll kind of always ask, and I asked on Monday, is how many of you wait until 2 weeks out to plan your food and beverage?
Yeah.
Or I said, how many of you are planning it out before the RFP or any of that? And nobody answered. They're waiting for those 2 weeks out. And I'm like, and I said to them, I'm flabbergasted by you, because this is your number one expenditure. And you spend the least amount of time on it.
Would you get married at a venue without tasting the food?
No.
Mark, we're in
Why
Vegas.
do you book a meeting?
We're in Las Vegas, Mark.
Exactly
pretty
right.
sure
Okay. You get married after dinner and you wasn't even a plan before dinner. I get.
We just met.
I get that. But the point that you make, Tracy, is really important. We don't ask questions. We're not qualified sometimes to evaluate and differentiate venues that don't have that passion, that expertise for managing an excellent food and beverage program for meetings. So we're going to trip over, and 2 weeks out, all you're going to get between 2 weeks and 1 week is a chefing team and a venue team that just need your information, because they've got to order and prepare. They're not in that mode to sit down and develop your menu around your needs, your attendee habits, what you've learned from your other events. Why is that conversation happening 6 months after you've signed the contract and you're committed to that venue?
Yep, it should be.
I've got a rhyme. Right. Committed to the venue and the menu, because that's what you've signed on the bottom line. And unless you're really agile, and I'm not saying that those venues don't exist, and within our membership, they certainly do. but you do set yourself up for a fall if you leave it to the 11th hour. And in our session, just to pick up on one question that came from our session yesterday, which was just give me one thing that I should focus on to deliver an excellent food and beverage program. And in the words of Dr. Aurora Benton, who was sat in our room, she said, therein lies the problem, because it's like, make this easy for me. Give me one thing, let me add it to my list, and I'm moving on, because food and beverage doesn't get my time and collective energy that it needs to.
And
what was great about that question was also, I thought it was really, really insightful. It should be kind of master of the obvious sort of a thing. But as planners come back, the demands are stronger and broader and just more challenging in every possible way. And it's great to know, right? They're already working so hard that they recognize, right? Trying to look at half a dozen different things or 8 different things simultaneously. Can you tell me what the very first thing is? What's the first thing I should do to start?
Right.
I think is a great question, because it indicates that there's an awful lot of planning that's already going on.
And a willingness.
Awful lot of willingness to change, awful lot of creativity and energy, awful lot of opportunity or willingness to reach out in the form of a partnership, asking the providers, you tell me, where do I start? What's the first thing I should ask? It's a great sign.
It really is. And just being a person who sources hotel rooms for clients, it's like changing the RFP process, right? And all the requests or all the responses I get from properties are literally the same. Here's the number of hotel rooms that we have. Here's the banquet space we have. This is how it will fit into your, our event. And majority of the time they don't even fit. They're just regurgitating the same proposal out, but with not even really answering the additional questions that we might have. Yeah. I'm like, if they don't answer your question on food safety, health inspection score, they're out of the.
I think they've answered it for you.
Yeah,
they've probably told you all they know, right?
And I get the fact that if you look specifically at first stage RFPs, we understand that venues are inundated with them. So to personalize and dig deep, and at that one point, that may not be possible. But don't forget, there's 2 to 3 stages after that where you narrow down, you have more focused conversations. It's down to you and 2 others or 1 other venue. They're the points that really your RFP and your questioning techniques and your evaluation techniques need to be a lot more robust around the areas of food and beverage, not just content and menus, but that whole service experience, because now interwoven into the food and beverage experience has got to be some other socially led, networking led experience as well. Like we talked about the festivalization of food, creating an event around a food service opportunity. So there are other elements in there as well that deserve your time and attention.
Yeah. And I was talking to Greg from Merritt's earlier today, and it's about experience. And the food and beverage is a huge experience aspect of any event. And they're going to talk about it. And you've talked about it too in some of the other sessions that we've done with IACC, is that, we need to empower them, feed them well, so they can, they have the brain function, right? Tyra Warner was with me. She's sharing a room here, and she's like, Tracy, on the floor, I had the beet juice yesterday with da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, she's like, and I had so much energy because I had the beet juice, right? And looking at the food in that perspective as well.
It's your opportunity to try something new in a conference or meeting environment that you probably wouldn't do in a personal environment. So spin that around, and it's our opportunity to educate individuals because they're in that open frame of mind to try something different. They're not in a family environment, restaurant environment, making detailed choices.
Right. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I didn't want to,
you can talk about whatever.
Change directions on this, but there was another, you mentioned about the different case studies that we talked about, and there was another, very exciting one that's right in line with Mark's talking about the innovation and the changes to the food program. So another one kind of born out of necessity, but has got an unbelievable story. So we've seen this in a lot of venues. The particular venue that we picked out was outside Brussels. That we used in the session the other day because it's got some great photography of what they've done, but they've repurposed their outdoor space. Right? Okay. And we are not talking about, there's a patio, just slap a tent on it so that we can continue to operate. This is, let's redesign that. Let's take a look at the hardscape and how can we break that up and really redesign the space so it looks custom made for outdoor dining. I can't really describe it as well as the pictures do it justice. We have to get you copies of those photos because they're absolutely beautiful. But again, here was the original idea is, well, then if we want to continue to do business in small to mid-sized groups, we could set some areas outside under the trees. And Mark said, almost kind of create a festival environment. It's very inviting and exciting, and it's invigorating when you eat. It's not just sit down and eat lunch, but it's really enjoy your colleagues, and created such beautiful space outdoors. Fast forward to now, that's the number one in demand space for their events. And the growth, if you look at pre-COVID to now, just in that space for demand is up 40%.
Wow.
Last I checked, we're just getting started, right? So it's a great story, but it shows how you mentioned earlier about some things we were trying to kind of get done and address before COVID. And I look at it as it's incrementalism, right? It's little by little by little. You never really quite get there. When you wipe the slate clean with something like COVID and you rebuild it like this space outside, you have a chance to really hit the mark. And I think the evidence is that they did. And there's a huge demand for that outdoor space.
You'd love it.
Yeah.
Well, because as Sean said, it's on the edge of he
forest,
said trees.
like it's a forest bathing.
You get exactly right. That's where I was going, on the edge of the Black Forest. Outside Brussels, and you are literally at one with nature. If we think about what we've seen evolve in the last couple of years, what's been exciting is, those spaces were always options beforehand, and as being outside from a health and well-being perspective, but it really, those spaces didn't get invested in the past because it was always looked at from a budgetary perspective. Will it get us more business? Will we be able to serve more people? Will it be more profitable? And that changed completely. It was, we have to develop these spaces to even operate. So that will be a good consequence as we look back.
That's
and a good consequence is accelerated investment in those areas. And I'm sure now that we've proven that the demand is there for those areas, it reduces the risk in the future to continue developing outdoor spaces, because we're in a convention centre, and as wonderful as this location in Las Vegas is, we will all be gravitating to a room with windows or to stand outside and have conversations very soon today, after being a few hours without that.
The profit question at that venue, that is going to go away. I mean, that, again, the demand and the popularity of that space, there's not going to be a question about the profitability of redesigning that, as you say, because there's your proof point.
And that's interesting. And a lot of the stuff around food and beverage is thought about because of the cost, right? Whether you're the planner wise or the venue side, it's like, is this so I love the fact that there is that case study that shows that.
If you don't start planning until 2 weeks out, what is left to discuss except the cost?
Exactly.
You're at that point where you can't make the effective upstream changes like we're talking about here. You start having that dialogue much earlier. And I'm not placing blame on anybody. That's just the order of things. And I was shocked when I heard that as well. How many of you, are more than 10 days to 2 weeks out early in that? But there's the direct connection. You're trying to affect so much change and improvement. Would you only give yourself 10 days to 2 weeks on any other project you ever worked on if you really wanted to make substantive change? We've had 18 months to redo and rethink and redesign, and some people are just crushing it.
And I hope those people just show off, saying, hey, look at what I'm doing. My numbers are up, and how can you compete, right?
Right. Yeah. But with cost comes labour, and we haven't really talked about that. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is lack of labour, and as that relates now and translates into increased costs. Look at the festivalisation sort of approach outdoors, creating an Oktoberfest or 4th of July, but in an outdoor environment with shared stations. That translates into lower labour costs for a venue in a typical conference centre than dealing with you with a sit-down dinner for a group in the restaurant. So that's going to translate into lower costs for you. So as meeting professionals want to do work more with their budget, work harder with their budget, one doesn't go against the other. We'll have to cut back on our food and beverage experience, to save money. No, just change and be more open-minded to the level of cost that's involved related to labour for certain types of food and beverage service, because there are some big differences, and it's having a profound effect on bottom lines, on selling prices, now that we're willing to look at these new service styles, and we've got the environment to accommodate them.
Yeah, and I was telling them in my session is like, you have to address the labor thing now. Even if you have your contract signed now and your event's not for 2 years, you need to, or you're looking at a venue now, look at the labor, because that's going to depend on how you design your event. Hey, and I love when we do the awards at IMEX Americas, and it's the cocktail reception, and then we go sit down in the theater style and do the awards, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that seated and served dinner. Based on staffing, you might have to go to that format.
Yes. Because
you don't have that staff. But it's also, to me, another way to elevate that experience of the food and beverage. And you've got action stations and funness, which is not a word, but think about
what you mean, and it is a big part of it. We for so many years we've said sitting down at formal banquets, whilst they're nice and you're privileged to be invited to them, don't get me wrong, but you'll get to know pretty well the person to your left and your right. You'll get to know nobody else.
Right.
And then you get people that are pretty selective over where they sit, because they know that if they sit in the wrong place, the person to their left and their right, if they've got nothing to gain from the conversations from them. So it's like a lottery or a bun fight to fight where you want to sit. Why do we put ourselves in these environments as meeting and event designers time after time after time? There are other options. And it doesn't mean that you get bad food. You can get incredibly good food that are served in those different service styles. And you're right, if you can create the quietness that you need around important messages still, just by being very deliberate in breaking up in an evening, that period of time. We learned very quickly in Philadelphia how you don't mix your drinks reception with your awards giving out and continue to serve, wine, and you've got to have a hard stop, because people want to talk and they continue to talk, and that then can be disrespectful for those that are being given their awards. So
that's a really good point.
We have learned to do exactly what you saw in Toronto in our subsequent events by putting a break in there and saying, right, we're going to take 20 minutes of your time to recognise incredible people, and then we're going to get right back to the social side of the evening.
Because that's where business happens.
All of which is more fun than the first picture you painted. Sit down at a banquet, oversized table, talk to the people left and right.
And somebody's left because they don't have a diet. They have a dietary need, and they don't get their food for 20 minutes, and
the rest of the table is polite and sits there, and their food is then cold.
Right. Or they all eat, and then the awards start, and you still don't have your food. Right.
Sounds like you speak from first-hand experience.
That's true. Right. I love the fact, right? If the industry and the planners and your listeners and everybody says, why do we tolerate that?
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Love the question.
Yeah.
Let's roll up our sleeves and go to a better place, because now's the time.
Well, and it also reminds me of somebody, I don't remember who it was, but they had an event, and because of COVID, put 6 people at a table instead of the 10 to 12, right? And the sponsor came back and said, no, of that one table, no, I want my 12 people. And she's like, he or she's like, I can't because of COVID restrictions. And at the end of the night, came and thanked her because it was a smaller table.
More deep and meaningful
with everybody at the room, and not just the 1 or 2, but it was easier to have that conversation. And I'm like, just think about it differently. You might need more space to do it, whatever, but
you're enriching it's that collision, those accidental conversations that are really important to have, but put people in the wrong environment, they're not going to happen.
Right.
And you can be like ships in the night with that person that could just be the best business decision or best conversation you've had related to a future business decision.
Yeah.
No, point really well made.
And if we're doing events, if we're creating events to bring people together, then why not enhance that experience? And to me, it's going to make your members happier, who are going to then continue to stay members, and it's going to make your sponsors happier or your donors happier and give you more money.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys, we've been talking for 33 minutes.
Wow, that's gone fast.
It has gone fast. So, any one quick point you want people to think about meetings going forward? Besides what we talked about?
Whatever time you're giving to the evaluation of a venue in terms of the food and beverage program, now double it and you won't be disappointed.
Okay.
That's my advice.
Awesome. I love that. Sean?
this is going to be more provocative, right? So we're going to need more. We're going to make a point here and move on, but maybe we'll need some follow-up because I would love your feedback. Okay. One of the things we asked the group, and it got a pretty positive response, honestly, was, is it time to trust your venue more? Mm-hmm. Does the venue need to step up? When you hear some of these creative ideas that we're coming up with, this is just all we have time to talk about in 30 minutes. Right. We could take 30 days and we'd have new ones every day because they're out there. Is it time to not start the conversation 2 weeks to 10 days out? Is it time for the venue to have ownership of creating better solutions, more exciting, more robust? So every bit is creative, every bit is cautious or focused on dietary, and delicious food and all those sorts of things, and bring that to the table earlier in the conversation so that they can give planners and buyers confidence that trust the venue. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking to a potential partner who doesn't get it, move on.
Yeah.
Move on. Yeah. I mean, we would like that challenge because I think holistically we would get better. That's what we're talking about the last half hour.
Right.
What was the challenge? What did we put on the table? How did the planners react? How did we grow from it?
Right.
I think this is the time as we're coming back. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity.
Awesome. Very cool. Right. Okay. I've asked you, but this is the last question. I asked you what your favorite food was in the last segment that we did earlier, so I'm going to ask you something different. Who would you want to have dinner with?
Oh my word. Raymond Blanc.
Raymond Blanc?
Yeah.
Why?
The chef, because I love his property, Le Manoir, in Oxfordshire, and because he's a gardener, a vegetable gardener at heart, but an incredible chef, which is primary. And so, I would just love an evening with Raymond Blanc because we could talk vegetables and growing and food and cooking and eating it. That's heaven.
All right, Sean, who would you want to eat dinner with? Dead or alive?
All right, yeah. So this is a whole different direction that I'm going to go here.
Okay.
And so it's going to, maybe this is kind of coming out of COVID the last couple of years, right? There are members of the family I haven't seen in a long time. I got to get them all around the table, one place, one time, so we can all kind of reconnect. Now is the time. We've been waiting. Yeah, so I'm sorry to get the mushy side of things.
Oh, no, that's good.
What we've all been doing the last 18.
But of course, all around a dish of English pork that you've
Well, we're coming to your dinner with your chef. That's where I'm bringing it back. But
yes. I'm coming as well.
So we're going to Le Manoir with you and your family?
Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah,
an extended family.
So I appreciate you heard it all. Thank you for the invitation, Mark.
And I'm jumping on his plane and coming with them too.
Come on. Yeah. You got to stop in Toronto. The same.
Yeah, exactly.
Same backwards deal.
Let's do our next podcast from Le Manoir.
Okay, we could totally do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much, Sean and Mark. Thank you so much for being with me. I really, really appreciate it, taking time out of IMEX, our busy schedules. And everybody for listening. This is the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where we talk to experts in all facets of food and beverage to create safe, inclusive, and sustainable experiences for all. And until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.